A young black girl gives up her first-class seat for an elderly man, but his response turns the cabin into a battlefield. What he doesn't know: she has the power to end his flight before it even begins. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Also, let me tell you something funny. Someone actually bet that I can't reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year, and honestly, I want to prove them wrong. So if you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and join the family. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is a very personal goal for me, and your support would mean the world to me. Thank you for believing in me and being part of this journey. And before you go, drop your name and location in the comments. I'd love to give you a special shout-out in my next video. The moment Naomi Carter stood up, she didn't expect applause. She didn't even expect a thank you. But she certainly didn't expect what came next. The cabin was chaos: delayed boarding, overhead bins slamming shut, passengers jostling for space in the cramped aisles of Flight 447. Tempers were already frayed when the elderly white man shuffled down the narrow passage, one hand gripping the seatbacks for balance, the other clutching a worn leather briefcase. His face was pale, his breathing labored. He looked like he might collapse before he reached row 12. Naomi saw him struggle. She didn't hesitate. "Sir," she said gently, standing from her aisle seat. "Please, take mine." The man paused. For a moment, she thought she saw gratitude flicker across his weathered features. But then his expression shifted, hardened into something colder, more entitled. "About time someone did the right thing," he muttered, sliding past her without meeting her eyes. No thank you. No acknowledgement. Just the scrape of his shoes against the floor and the thud of his briefcase hitting the armrest as he claimed her seat like it had always been his. The cabin went still. Passengers froze mid-motion. A woman clutching a neck pillow, a businessman halfway into his row, a flight attendant pausing with a tray of pre-departure waters. They all heard it. They all saw it. And then, as if on cue, they all looked away. Naomi stood there for 3 seconds longer than she needed to. Not because she was shocked, she'd lived long enough to recognize dismissal when she heard it, but because she wanted to see if anyone else would say something. A defense. A correction. Even just a disapproving look. Nothing. She gathered her backpack and moved toward the back of the plane, her fingers trailing along the seatbacks, her sneakers soundless against the worn carpet. The middle seat in row 23. Wedged between a sleeping college student and a businessman who'd already claimed both armrests. It was easily the worst seat on the plane. And the elderly man knew it. Naomi Carter had learned 3 things from her grandmother before she turned 10. How to read a room, how to hold her tongue, and how to recognize when someone mistakes your kindness for weakness. Sitting in row 23B, cramped between strangers, she watched the man settle into her seat. He arranged his belongings with theatrical precision, briefcase in the overhead bin, jacket folded just so on his lap, reading glasses perched on his nose. Then he pressed the call button. The flight attendant appeared within seconds, her smile professional but strained. "Yes, sir? How can I help you?" "This seat," the man said loudly, gesturing at the cushion beneath him, "is absolutely filthy. And the legroom is unacceptable for someone my age. I have a back condition, you understand?" The flight attendant's eyes flicked to Naomi's former seat, which was neither dirty nor lacking in legroom, and then to Naomi herself, 20 rows back. Recognition crossed her face. She'd seen the exchange. She knew. "I'm sorry, sir," she said carefully. "That's actually one of our better seats. We're fully booked today, so—" "Fully booked?" The man's voice rose. "I'm 73 years old. I have sciatica. And you're telling me this airline can't accommodate basic human decency?" Passengers were watching now. Some with sympathy. Others with irritation. The businessman beside Naomi shifted uncomfortably, his elbow digging further into her ribs. "I understand, sir," the flight attendant continued, her voice dropping to soothe. "Let me see what I can do." The man waved her away dismissively. Just get me some water. Warm, not cold. My throat is sensitive. Naomi watched this performance with the detached calm of someone who'd seen variations of it her entire life. The manufactured frailty. The strategic mention of age and ailment. The way he spoke past the flight attendant rather than to her, as if service workers existed in a different dimension, present but not quite human. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. 20 minutes into the flight, after the safety demonstration and the captain's welcome, the man began talking. Not to anyone in particular. Just talking. You know, he said loudly, addressing the middle-aged woman across the aisle, when I was young, people understood respect. You gave up your seat for your elders without being asked. It was just done. The woman nodded politely, her eyes returning to her magazine. These days, he continued undeterred, you have to practically beg for common courtesy. And even then, he gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane, toward Naomi's section. Even then, you can tell they're doing it reluctantly, like it's some great sacrifice. Naomi's fingers tightened around her phone. The college student beside her stirred, pulling out an earbud. Did he just? She whispered. Yep, Naomi said softly. That's messed up. Yep. The girl hesitated, glancing toward row 12 where the man now sat, his voice carrying easily over the ambient hum of the engines. Should we say something? Naomi considered this. She'd learned another lesson from her grandmother, one that had taken years to truly understand. Timing matters more than volume. Not yet, she said. The man's commentary didn't stop. If anything, it grew bolder as the flight progressed, fueled by the cabin's collective silence. I raised 3 children, he announced to no one and everyone. Taught them manners. Taught them to show gratitude. Not like these kids today, walking around with their phones, thinking the world owes them something. A businessman 2 rows up shifted in his seat. A mother traveling with her toddlers suddenly became very interested in her child's coloring book. The flight attendant passed by with the beverage cart, her jaw tight. And don't even get me started, the man continued, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, on entitlement. You give someone an inch, and they think they deserve a mile. No sense of their place in the world. No understanding of hierarchy. Naomi's thumb hovered over her phone screen. She'd been typing steadily since takeoff, documenting timestamps, direct quotes, observable behavior. Her notes app now contained a detailed log of everything the man had said, complete with contextual observations about passenger reactions and crew responses. She added one more line, direct reference to knowing one's place, 14:37 Pacific Standard Time. The businessman beside her finally spoke. Excuse me, miss? His voice was quiet, apologetic. I couldn't help but notice. Is he talking about you? Naomi looked at him, really looked. Mid-40s, expensive suit, wedding ring, briefcase with a corporate logo she recognized. The kind of man who probably considered himself progressive, who'd posted a black square on social media in 2020, who genuinely believed he wasn't part of the problem. Yes, she said simply. His face flushed. I'm sorry. That's completely inappropriate. I know. Should I say something? I could. Please don't. Naomi's voice was gentle but firm. She knew what would happen if he intervened. The man would deflect. He'd claim misunderstanding. He'd position himself as the victim of oversensitivity. And the businessman, having performed his good deed, would return to his spreadsheets with a clear conscience while Naomi dealt with the aftermath. But, I've got it handled, she said. The businessman looked uncertain but nodded, settling back into his seat. Naomi could feel his discomfort radiating in waves. Discomfort was the beginning of awareness. Row 12 had fallen quiet. The man was reading now, or pretending to, his newspaper held high like a barrier between himself and the rest of the cabin. He'd said his piece, made his point, established his worldview for anyone within earshot. And now he was content. Naomi scrolled through her phone, past her detailed notes, to a different app. Her finger hovered over a contact name, Marcus, Regional Compliance Director, Federal Aviation Administration. Her brother. She didn't tap it. Not yet. Instead, she opened her photos and found the image she'd taken before boarding, her FAA credentials, clearly visible, bearing her full name and title, Naomi Carter, Civil Rights Compliance Investigator, Aviation Division. She'd been flying to a conference in Denver, a routine trip to present findings on discriminatory practices in air travel. The irony wasn't lost on her. Neither was the opportunity. Naomi closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory, "Baby girl, you've got more power in your pinky finger than men like that will ever know. But power without control is just noise. And you? You're not noise. You're thunder." When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. She would wait. She would watch. She would document everything. And when the moment was right, when the man felt most secure in his assumed superiority, she would show him exactly what happened when you mistake silence for surrender. Her fingers tightened around her phone, no longer from anger but from purpose. The flight had 2 hours left. The man had no idea his had just begun. The beverage service began at 30,000 feet, and with it, the man found a new audience. "Coffee," he said when the flight attendant reached his row, not looking up from his newspaper. "And make sure it's hot this time. Last flight I was on, they served me lukewarm dishwater." The attendant, her name tag read Jennifer, smiled with practiced patience. "Of course, sir. I'll make sure it's fresh." As she poured, the man folded his newspaper with deliberate precision and addressed the passengers around him. "You know what the problem is with air travel today? Nobody takes pride in their work anymore. It's all minimum effort for maximum pay." Jennifer's hand trembled slightly, a single drop of coffee landing on the tray table. The man's eyes locked onto it immediately. "See?" He gestured at the droplet as if it were evidence in a criminal trial. "Can't even pour a simple cup of coffee without making a mess. This is what I'm talking about. Standards have completely deteriorated." "I apologize, sir." Jennifer's voice remained steady, but Naomi could see the tension in her shoulders. "Let me get you a napkin." "A napkin?" The man laughed, a sharp, performative sound designed to carry. "How about competence? How about hiring people who actually know how to do their jobs?" 2 rows back, Naomi felt the words land like physical blows. Not against her, not directly, but she understood the code. She'd been decoding it her entire life. People who know how to do their jobs. Standards. Taking pride in work. Each phrase was a brushstroke in a larger portrait of contempt, one that relied on the listener to fill in the racial and socioeconomic blanks. The middle-aged woman across the aisle from the man, the one who'd nodded politely earlier, now made a soft sound of agreement. "It's true," she murmured. "Things really have changed." The man seized on this validation like oxygen. Finally, someone who understands. "You see it too, don't you? The decline in values. The lack of respect for tradition." "Absolutely," the woman said, warming to the topic. "When I was growing up, people knew their roles. Society functioned because everyone understood where they belonged." Naomi's stomach tightened. The college student beside her had gone rigid, her earbuds dangling uselessly in her lap, forgotten. "Are they seriously?" the girl whispered. "Yes," Naomi said quietly. "They are." The man's voice grew more confident with each passing minute, emboldened by the woman's agreement and the cabin's collective failure to challenge him. "And don't get me wrong," he continued, his tone taking on false magnanimity, "I'm not saying people don't mean well. Some of them do. But good intentions don't make up for a lack of proper upbringing. You can't just give people opportunities they haven't earned and expect them to know what to do with them." A businessman 3 rows up suddenly became very focused on his laptop. A young couple near the window exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. The mother with the toddler gathered her child closer, whispering, "Let's play the quiet game now, sweetie." Jennifer moved down the aisle with the beverage cart, her movements mechanical, her face carefully blank. When she reached Naomi's row, their eyes met for a fraction of a second. In that brief moment, Naomi saw recognition, not of her identity, but of shared experience. The silent acknowledgement of women who'd learned to absorb contempt as part of their job description. Something to drink? Jennifer asked softly. Water, please, Naomi said. Then quieter, and thank you for your patience back there. Jennifer's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing exhaustion and gratitude in equal measure. It's part of the job, she said, but her eyes said something else. It shouldn't be. Behind them, the man's monologue continued. I pay good money for these tickets, you understand? I expect a certain level of service. A certain level of appropriateness. The businessman beside Naomi shifted uncomfortably, his elbow finally retreating from the shared armrest. This is getting out of hand, he muttered. Yes, Naomi agreed. Someone should say something. Naomi turned to look at him fully. Then say something. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked toward row 12 where the man sat, now engaged in animated conversation with his new ally across the aisle. The businessman's face reddened. What if I make it worse? There was the fear that paralyzed even well-meaning people. The calculation that their comfort mattered more than someone else's dignity. Then it gets worse, Naomi said simply. But at least you tried. He looked away. Naomi felt the heat rising in her chest, not anger exactly, but something closer to grief. Grief for the version of herself that had believed people would intervene. Grief for every time she'd given someone the benefit of the doubt, only to watch them choose silence. Her grandmother's voice returned, gentle but firm. Baby girl, embarrassment is just another tool they use. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing it work. But the embarrassment was real. It sat in her stomach like a stone, heavy and cold. She was 24 years old, educated, credentialed, and powerful in ways this man couldn't fathom. Yet here she sat, being discussed like an abstract problem, her humanity reduced to a talking point in someone else's narrative about decline and disorder. The anger came next, hot and sharp and demanding release. Her hands wanted to shake. Her voice wanted to rise. Every instinct screamed at her to stand up, walk back to row 12, and dismantle the man's worldview piece by piece. But she didn't. Because her grandmother had taught her something else, something harder. Anger without strategy is just noise. And baby girl, you're not noise. Naomi closed her eyes and breathed. One breath. 2, 3. When she opened them, her hands were steady. The man wanted a reaction. He was counting on a reaction. Every word he spoke was bait, carefully designed to provoke an emotional response that would confirm his assumptions and justify his contempt. If she confronted him now, angry, hurt, visibly affected, he would win. Not because he was right, but because he'd gotten exactly what he wanted. Silence, she realized, was its own form of power. Not the silence of submission, but the silence of someone choosing their moment with surgical precision. She could wait. She would wait. Naomi unlocked her phone with careful deliberation. No sudden movements. No visible agitation. Just a young woman checking her messages, unremarkable and invisible. She opened her work email and began typing. To Regional Director Marcus Carter, FAA Compliance CC. Email protected, subject. In-flight discrimination incident report, Flight 447, ATL Den. Priority check. The email was clinical, precise, and devastating in its detail. She included timestamps, direct quotes, observable passenger reactions, and crew response patterns. She attached photos of her boarding pass and credentials. She noted the flight number, crew names visible on name tags, and the seat number of the individual in question. Her fingers moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd filed dozens of these reports. But this one was different. This one was personal, and that made it more important, not less, that she get it exactly right. She didn't mention that she was the target. She didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. Before sending, she added one final line. This incident is ongoing. Passengers' safety and dignity remain compromised. Requesting immediate protocol review and post-flight follow-up. Will be available for full debriefing upon landing. Her thumb hovered over the send button for 3 seconds. Then she pressed it. The email went through with a soft whoosh. Somewhere in an Atlanta office, an automated system logged her report. Priority flags triggered. Notification systems activated. The machinery of accountability began its slow, inevitable turn. Naomi looked up to find Jennifer pushing the beverage cart back toward the galley. As she passed row 12, her phone, tucked in her apron pocket, vibrated. She paused, pulled it out, and her expression shifted. Not dramatically. Just a subtle tightening around her eyes, a straightening of her spine. Jennifer's gaze swept the cabin until it found Naomi. Their eyes met again, and this time, understanding passed between them. Jennifer knew. Not everything, not yet. But enough to know that something had changed. The flight attendant leaned toward her colleague, an older man named Robert, according to his name tag, and whispered something. Robert's eyebrows rose. He glanced toward Naomi, then toward row 12, then back to Jennifer. They exchanged a look heavy with meaning. The energy in the cabin shifted. Passengers couldn't name it, couldn't point to any specific change, but they felt it nonetheless. The way you feel a storm building even before you see the clouds. In row 12, the man was oblivious. He'd finished his coffee and his conversation with the woman across the aisle. He'd made his points, shared his grievances, and received validation from his chosen audience. Now he sat back with visible satisfaction, his newspaper folded neatly on his lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. He'd said what needed saying. Put that girl in her place without having to directly confront her. Reminded everyone on this flight about the importance of standards and respect for elders and the proper order of things. He'd won. Or so he thought. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he adjusted his reading glasses. He glanced briefly toward the back of the plane, toward row 23, where Naomi sat, and his smile widened. She was looking down at her phone, quiet and small and exactly where she belonged. Perfect. The man closed his eyes, satisfied, and settled in for the remainder of the flight. He had no idea that in 2 hours, when this plane touched down in Denver, his name would be flagged in 3 separate federal databases. He had no idea that the quiet girl he dismissed had just set in motion a process that would follow him through every airport, every flight, every interaction with the airline industry for years to come. He had no idea that silence was never surrender. It was strategy. 45 minutes before landing, the cabin intercom crackled to life with a sound that made every passenger look up, not the standard announcement chime, but 3 short tones. The code. Jennifer and Robert exchanged glances from their positions at opposite ends of the cabin. Jennifer pressed the call button on the wall panel, 2 short, 1 long. Another code. The businessman beside Naomi noticed. That's unusual, he murmured. I fly every week. Never heard that sequence before. Naomi said nothing. She knew exactly what those tones meant. She'd helped write the protocol. Priority communication. Crew alert. Potential in-flight incident requiring senior intervention. From the cockpit, a figure emerged, not the captain, but someone equally authoritative. The senior flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled into an immaculate bun and 3 decades of aviation experience etched into her posture. Her name tag read Patricia Chin, lead FA. Patricia moved through the cabin with purpose, stopping first at the galley where Jennifer and Robert waited. The 3 spoke in low tones, Jennifer showing Patricia her phone. Patricia's expression remained neutral, but her eyes, sharp and assessing, told a different story. Then Patricia turned and looked directly at Naomi. Their eyes met across 20 rows of seats. Patricia gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. I see you. I understand. We got this. The man in row 12 dozed peacefully, unaware. Patricia approached row 12 with the measured calm of someone who'd handled every conceivable crisis at 30,000 feet. She stopped beside the man's seat, her presence commanding enough that nearby passengers fell silent. Excuse me, sir. Her voice was professional but carried an edge that made people listen. I need to speak with you for a moment. The man stirred, blinking behind his reading glasses. What is it? Sir, I'm Patricia Chin, the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. I need you to come with me to the galley, please. The galley? He looked confused, then annoyed. But I'm perfectly comfortable here. If this is about the coffee earlier... Sir. Patricia's tone didn't rise, but it hardened. "This is not a request. Please gather your essentials and come with me. Now." The cabin went utterly silent. Every conversation stopped. Every screen was paused. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. Something serious was happening, something that violated the usual script of air travel. The man's face flushed. "I don't understand what this is about. I haven't done anything wrong." "We'll discuss this privately," Patricia said. "But you need to come with me now." Reluctantly, grumbling under his breath, the man stood. He shot the woman across the aisle a look that said, "Can you believe this?" She looked away. As they walked toward the galley, passing row 23 where Naomi sat, the man's eyes found hers. For just a moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then dismissal. Surely this couldn't be about her. The galley curtain was pulled closed, but voices carried in the pressurized cabin. Not loud enough for words, but loud enough for tone. Patricia's voice, firm, methodical. The man's, defensive, escalating. Then, after 3 minutes that felt like 30, the curtain pulled back. Patricia emerged first, her expression unreadable. Behind her, the man's face had gone from red to pale. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped his briefcase. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia announced, her voice cutting through the cabin's anxious silence. "We apologize for the disruption. This aircraft operates under federal aviation regulations that include strict policies against discriminatory behavior and harassment of passengers and crew. These policies are non-negotiable and will be enforced." She let that hang in the air for a moment. When violations occur, they are documented, reported, and addressed according to protocol. All passengers are entitled to travel with dignity and respect, regardless of race, age, gender, or any other characteristic. This is not a suggestion. This is federal law. Every eye in the cabin was now fixed on Patricia. The man stood beside her, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Sir," Patricia continued, turning to address him directly, "you have been formally documented for multiple violations of airline conduct policy, specifically regarding discriminatory commentary, harassment, and creating a hostile environment for other passengers." I didn't," he stammered. "This is ridiculous. I was just making conversation. I have a right to express my opinions." "You have the right to express opinions," Patricia said evenly. "You do not have the right to demean, belittle, or harass other passengers while doing so. Your comments have been documented and will be included in a formal report filed with both airline management and federal aviation compliance." The woman who'd agreed with him earlier was suddenly very interested in the window. "Your statements," Patricia continued, pulling out a small notebook, included, and I quote, "People these days don't understand their place. Standards have completely deteriorated. You can't just give people opportunities they haven't earned." These comments, made loudly and repeatedly while referencing a specific passenger who showed you kindness, constitute a clear pattern of discriminatory behavior. "But I never said, I wasn't talking about," the man's voice cracked. "I'm 73 years old. You can't treat me like some criminal for having an opinion." "Age," Patricia said quietly, "does not grant you immunity from basic human decency. Sir, you will be relocated for the remainder of this flight." "Relocated?" The man's voice rose to a pitch that bordered on panic. "To where? This is absurd. I demand to speak to the captain." "The captain is aware and supports this decision," Patricia said. "You'll be moved to 27B. A middle seat." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Row 27B was 3 rows behind Naomi. The worst seat on the plane. Absolutely not. The man's composure shattered completely. "I have a back condition. I need the legroom. That girl, she gave me this seat. She offered it freely." "That girl," a new voice said, calm and clear, "has a name." Naomi stood from row 23, stepping into the aisle. Every head turned toward her. She moved forward with unhurried grace, her phone in one hand, her credentials in the other. When she reached the galley, she stopped 2 feet from the man and met his eyes with steady, unflinching calm. "My name is Naomi Carter," she said. Her voice carried through the silent cabin like a bell. I'm a civil rights compliance investigator with the Federal Aviation Administration. I've spent the last 2 hours documenting every word you've said, every gesture you've made, and every passenger reaction to your behavior. The man's face went from pale to gray. I gave you my seat, Naomi continued, her tone never rising, never hardening, just stating facts, because you looked tired and I believed you needed it more than I did. I didn't give you my seat so you could spend the next hour publicly questioning my intelligence, my upbringing, or my right to exist in the same space as you. I wasn't, he sputtered. You were, Naomi said simply. And now it's documented. Officially. Permanently. Your name is now flagged in the FAA's incident database. Every airline in this country will have access to this report. TSA will be notified. You will be placed on an enhanced screening watch list. The man opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came. I didn't give you permission to demean me, Naomi said, and in that moment, her voice carried the weight of every person who'd ever been dismissed, diminished, or degraded in silence. And you're about to learn what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Patricia gestured to Robert, who'd been waiting nearby. Please escort this passenger to his new seat. The man looked around desperately, at the other passengers, at the woman who'd agreed with him earlier, at anyone who might intervene on his behalf. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was absolute and damning. As Robert led him past Naomi toward row 27, the man tried one last time. This is harassment. I'll be filing a complaint. I know people. So do I, Naomi said quietly. The difference is, mine will actually answer. The man's shoulders sagged. Whatever fight remained in him died in that moment. He shuffled toward his new seat, the middle seat, cramped and uncomfortable, and collapsed into it with the weight of someone who just watched their entire worldview crumble. Naomi returned to row 23. As she passed, passengers watched her with new eyes. The businessman beside her seat stood up, offering her the aisle position he'd been occupying. Please, he said quietly. It's the least I can do. She nodded and took the seat. Patricia appeared moments later, crouching beside Naomi's row. Ms. Carter, on behalf of this crew and this airline, I apologize for not intervening sooner. Your report has been logged and escalated. We should have protected you from the start. You protected me in the end, Naomi said. That matters. Patricia squeezed her hand once, then stood and addressed the cabin one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into Denver shortly. Thank you for your patience and understanding. As Patricia walked away, something remarkable happened. One passenger began to clap. Softly at first, then louder. Another joined in. Then another. Within seconds, 2/3 of the cabin was applauding, not dramatically, not performatively, but with genuine respect. The college student beside Naomi wiped her eyes. That was incredible, she whispered. No, Naomi said gently. That was necessary. In row 27, the man sat in silence, staring at nothing, finally understanding what he'd lost. Not just comfort, not just dignity, but the blissful ignorance that had allowed him to live his entire life believing that respect was something he could demand rather than something he had to earn. 20 minutes before landing, Patricia appeared at Naomi's row once more, but this time her expression was softer, almost apologetic. Ms. Carter, she said quietly, your original seat in row 12 is available if you'd like to return to it. Naomi looked up from her phone, where she'd been reviewing the final details of her incident report. For a moment, she considered declining. The symbolic weight of staying put, of not reclaiming what had been taken, felt important somehow. A statement that she didn't need the seat to have power. But then she realized, that was exactly the kind of thinking that let people like the man in row 27 win in different ways. She'd given up her seat out of kindness, and it had been weaponized against her. Reclaiming it wasn't about comfort or revenge. It was about refusing to let cruelty reshape her choices. Thank you, Naomi said, standing. I'd appreciate that. The college student beside her smiled, a genuine, admiring smile. You're amazing, you know that? I'm just doing my job, Naomi replied. No, the girl said firmly. You're doing more than that. As Naomi gathered her backpack, the businessman who'd finally surrendered the armrest stood as well. Ms. Carter, he said, his voice thick with something between shame and respect, I want to apologize. I should have said something earlier. I knew what was happening and I just sat there. Naomi met his eyes. She could see genuine remorse there, the uncomfortable awakening of someone confronting their own complicity. This was the moment where she could shame him, could make him feel as small as she'd been made to feel. But that wasn't who she was. You're saying something now, she said gently. That's a start. Next time, don't wait. He nodded, the weight of those words settling on his shoulders like a responsibility he'd just agreed to carry. The walk from row 23 to row 12 felt longer than 20 rows should. Every pair of eyes tracked Naomi's movement, not with judgment this time, but with something closer to reverence. Some passengers nodded as she passed. Others looked away, unable to meet her gaze, their own silence too fresh and shameful. She passed row 27 without looking. She didn't need to. The man's presence had shrunk somehow, his physical space diminished by the weight of consequence. He sat wedged between two passengers who'd strategically angled their bodies away from him, creating small fortresses of distance and disapproval. When Naomi reached row 12, she found her seat exactly as she'd left it, window position, good legroom, the small packet of pretzels she'd left in the seat pocket still there. But everything had changed. Patricia had placed a handwritten note on the tray table. Thank you for your grace and your courage. The Flight 447 crew. Naomi folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket. She settled into the seat, fastened her seatbelt, and looked out the window as Denver's mountains came into view through the clouds, their peaks dusted with early snow. Behind her, she heard whispers beginning to ripple through the cabin. In row 15, a middle-aged man leaned toward his wife. I should have said something, he murmured, his voice barely audible. When he started with those comments, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't want to cause a scene. His wife touched his hand. I didn't either, she admitted. I kept thinking someone else would handle it. Someone braver than me. She was braver, he said. And she was alone. The wife nodded, her eyes glistening. Not anymore. In row 18, the woman who'd agreed with the man earlier sat frozen, her magazine unread in her lap. Her husband beside her had heard everything. The man's comments, her soft agreements, the entire humiliating reversal. Claire, he said finally, his voice tight with disappointment, did you really believe what that man was saying? She opened her mouth to defend herself, to explain that she'd just been being polite, that she hadn't really meant it. But the words died in her throat because they weren't true. She had meant it, in the casual, unconsidered way people mean things when they think no one's really paying attention or getting hurt. I don't know, she whispered finally, and it was the most honest thing she'd said all flight. I think I need to examine why I agreed with him so easily. Her husband nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. I think you do. In row 8, a young black man traveling with his mother turned to her with tears in his eyes. That could have been you, Mom. That could have been me. His mother squeezed his hand. But it wasn't, baby. And you saw what happened. You saw that silence doesn't mean surrender. I wanted to go back there, he said. When I heard what he was saying, I wanted to defend her. She defended herself, his mother said gently. Sometimes the best thing we can do is bear witness and remember. Remember so we do better next time. In the galley, Jennifer and Robert stood with Patricia, preparing for landing procedures but unable to shake what had just transpired. I failed her, Jennifer said quietly, her professional composure finally cracking. I heard him. I saw what he was doing. And I just kept serving drinks and smiling like everything was fine. Patricia shook her head. You didn't fail her. The system failed her. We're trained to de-escalate, to avoid confrontation, to keep everyone comfortable. But sometimes keeping everyone comfortable means letting someone be uncomfortable alone. So what do we do differently? Robert asked. He was older, a veteran of 30 years in the industry, and his voice carried the frustration of someone who'd seen this scenario play out too many times. The protocols don't cover this. Not really. They tell us to report incidents, but by the time we've followed proper channels, the damage is done. We start by acknowledging it, Patricia said. Ms. Carter shouldn't have had to be her own advocate. That's on us. That's on the industry. And I'm going to make damn sure this incident gets more than just filed away in some database. I'm requesting a full policy review. Jennifer nodded, wiping her eyes. I want to apologize to her properly. After we land. I think she'd appreciate that, Patricia said. But I also think she already knows we're on her side. She knew the moment she sent that email that the system, however imperfect, would respond. That's why she had the courage to wait. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and practiced. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing. We'll be on the ground in Denver in approximately 10 minutes. Current temperature is 42 degrees, and we're expecting a smooth touchdown. As the plane descended, Naomi felt the pressure change in her ears. She swallowed, adjusted, and continued looking out the window. The city sprawled below, grid patterns of streets, clusters of buildings, the snaking line of highways carrying people to destinations unknown. From row 27, she heard a sound. Quiet at first, then unmistakable. The man was crying, not loud, performative sobs, but the soft, broken sound of someone confronting a truth they'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Naomi didn't turn around. His grief was his to carry. She'd done what needed doing. The rest was up to him. The businessman who'd occupied row 12 across the aisle, the one who'd initially validated the man's complaints, caught Naomi's eye. He looked like he wanted to say something, to explain himself, to distance himself from what had happened. Instead, he simply mouthed two words, "I'm sorry." Naomi nodded once. Acceptance without absolution. Another lesson learned. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and the cabin filled with the familiar sounds of arrival, the roar of reverse thrust, the mechanical whir of spoilers deploying, the ding of the seatbelt sign remaining illuminated. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Patricia's voice came over the intercom one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Denver International Airport. On behalf of the entire crew of Flight 447, thank you for flying with us today. We'd like to remind all passengers that air travel is a shared experience, and we all have a responsibility to treat one another with dignity and respect. She paused, letting the words settle. To those of you who witnessed something uncomfortable today, we encourage you to reflect on what you saw and what you might do differently in the future. To the passenger who showed us all what courage looks like, we thank you. And to everyone, may we all learn to recognize kindness when we see it and protect it when it's threatened. The cabin remained quiet as the plane reached the gate. No one rushed to stand. No one immediately grabbed their overhead luggage. They sat, absorbing, processing, understanding that something significant had happened, something that transcended the simple mechanics of air travel. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off, passengers began to move with unusual courtesy. People let others go first. Overhead bins were opened carefully. The usual aggressive jostle to deplane was absent, replaced by a collective gentleness born of shared discomfort and grudging growth. Naomi gathered her backpack and waited. She wasn't in a hurry. Her conference didn't start until tomorrow morning. As she stepped into the aisle, the college student from row 23 appeared beside her. "I know this is weird," the girl said, "but can I give you my number? I'm studying social justice at CU Boulder, and what you did today, I want to remember it. I want to do better. To be better." Naomi smiled, the first genuine smile since boarding. "That's not weird at all." They exchanged numbers quickly, and the girl moved on, her eyes bright with purpose. The businessman who'd offered her his armrest stopped her next. "Ms. Carter," he said, pulling out a business card, "I'm a corporate trainer. I do workshops on workplace culture and ethics. I'd like to hire you as a consultant if you're interested. Today taught me that I've been teaching the wrong things." Naomi took the card. "I might take you up on that." At the exit, as passengers filed past the crew to deplane, Jennifer caught Naomi's arm gently. "Ms. Carter," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I need you to know how sorry I am. I should have done more. I should have been better." Naomi looked at this woman, this professional who'd spent 2 hours maintaining composure while absorbing contempt, and saw herself reflected back. They were different versions of the same truth. Women who'd learned to survive by staying small, staying quiet, staying professional. You did what you were trained to do, Naomi said gently. Now we change the training. Jennifer nodded, tears spilling over. Thank you for not giving up on us. I never gave up, Naomi said. I just waited for the right moment. Patricia stood beside Jennifer, her silver hair catching the cabin light. Ms. Carter, your report has already reached executive level. There's going to be a full investigation, policy revision, and mandatory training implementation. Because of you, things will change. They'd better, Naomi said, but her tone was warm, not harsh. Thank you for listening when it mattered. As Naomi stepped off the plane into the jetway, she heard one final sound from inside the cabin. The man from row 27, his voice hoarse and broken, saying to no one in particular, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She didn't stop. His apology, like his cruelty, was his burden to carry. The terminal was chaos, families reuniting, business travelers speed-walking toward connections, the ambient noise of 1,000 journeys intersecting briefly before diverging again. Naomi moved through it all with calm purpose. Not triumphant. Not wounded. Simply whole. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother Marcus. Just saw your report. Holy shit, sis. You okay? She typed back, I'm good. Story for dinner tomorrow. Another text, this time from her grandmother. Something told me to pray for you today. Everything all right, baby girl? Naomi smiled. Everything's fine, Grandma. I'll call you tonight. Love you. As she walked toward baggage claim, Naomi passed a young black girl, maybe 16, traveling alone, her backpack covered in college visit stickers. The girl looked nervous, uncomfortable, like she was bracing herself for something. Their eyes met briefly. Naomi gave her a small nod. You belong here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The girl's shoulders straightened slightly. She nodded back, understanding passing between them without words. Outside, Denver's thin air filled Naomi's lungs as she stepped into the pickup area. The mountains loomed in the distance, ancient and unmoved by the small dramas of human existence. But small dramas mattered. They always had. Because today, on Flight 447, a truth had been lived that too often went unspoken. Kindness is not weakness. The man had mistaken her generosity for submission, her courtesy for powerlessness. He'd learned otherwise. Silence is not surrender. She'd waited, watched, and documented, not because she was afraid to speak, but because she understood that timing matters more than volume. Respect is not inherited, it's earned. The man had believed his age, his race, his perceived position entitled him to deference. He'd discovered that respect without reciprocity is just another word for dominance. And dominance, when challenged, crumbles. Naomi's phone buzzed one more time. An email from Patricia. Ms. Carter, the passenger from row 27 has requested permission to send you a formal apology. I told him that was your decision. Let me know. Patricia. Naomi considered this. The man wanted absolution, wanted to feel better about himself, wanted to smooth over the rough edges of his conscience. She typed back, tell him he can write his apology. But not to me. To the next person he's tempted to diminish. To his children. To himself in the mirror. That's where his work begins. She hit send and pocketed her phone. A rideshare pulled up. Naomi slid into the back seat, and the driver, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, smiled at her in the rearview mirror. Good flight? She asked. Naomi thought about this for a moment. Educational, she said finally. The driver laughed. Aren't they all? As the car pulled away from the terminal, Naomi looked back one last time at the airport, at the planes landing and taking off, at the constant flow of humanity moving through shared spaces, negotiating unspoken rules, learning hard lessons. She thought about the man in row 27, sitting diminished in his middle seat, finally understanding what he'd lost. She thought about the passengers who'd stayed silent, now carrying their guilt towards some better version of themselves. She thought about Jennifer and Patricia and Robert, working within a flawed system, trying to do better. And she thought about herself, about the girl who'd stood up to give her seat, never imagining that simple act would become a lesson in power, dignity, and the long arc of accountability. Sometimes the person you look down on is the only one in the room who truly understands how power works. Not the power of position or privilege, but the power of patience, the power of documentation, the power of knowing exactly when to strike and how to win without ever raising your voice. As the car merged onto the highway, heading toward the mountains and the city beyond, Naomi closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of peace. She'd done what needed doing. The rest was up to the world. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.